You're here to study Bridgman. This is recording 11 on the shoulder and arms from our 12-session 2020 bootcamp. Updates are always at martialart.com. In May, I will begin a series on drawing lessons from Heinrich Kley. We begin with a free pre-meeting April 29th. Go to martialart.com. And we are here. Yesterday, I showed you this simplified knee. And I also encouraged you to seek the fact that there's more anatomy to it than that. And for that vastus lateralis, which is going to go up there and meld into, actually it's going to have a strap of a tendon, it would be straighter than that would go into that kneecap there, which would get wider. There's going to be more detail on there. The thing I specifically pointed out is that that line won't go straight down. That line on the side will be a little bit indented at some point and then wrap around that, and that can catch shadow. And I even showed you on this my bridge, though not in such clear detail as I've got it there today. That's been upsampled. That's a blurry slide, but look how much you can see about that iliotibial band aiming toward what? Aiming toward right there, the tibia. And that's the biceps femoris aiming toward what? The head of the fibula. And here it is also. And you can see that it goes in front of that gastrocnemius. And that is vastus lateralis. That is a portion of a sort of football-shaped muscle. Now watch, we're going to go back to what Bridgman did. You say, if you're having us seek more anatomy than Bridgman used, why? He left it out. So why did I send you seeking? You are seeking what is left out to attend, to pay such attention to anatomy that you can look at a mannequin and carve anatomy into it or add bumps that would be there. That ability to look at a mannequin and envision anatomy on it, that means you've learned anatomy. It might sound disappointing that you should learn skills and not show them off. But this is a principle of making good art that I never mastered. I put everything in. A few times I left out things wisely, but understating was not a regular part of my work, and I wish it had been, and I want it to be, and you may. So, okay, leaving things out, there's value in that. How do we know what to leave out? It comes from personal preference. How do I know my personal preference? How do you know if you're really in love? If you don't know your personal preference, who would? It's supposed to be your personal preference. Artists have opinions. Opinions like, it should look this way. I should simplify that. I should make that more complex. And when the audience says, wow, that looks great, we've boiled down the entire discipline of aesthetics to something practical. Do what you like. If others like it, you're in. But if you really are having trouble with what is my personal opinion, go to the people. Here's what in taking that question seriously, because I get it all the time. How do I know? How do I know? How do I know what I like? There are people who will say, if you have to ask that question, you're never going to have a personal preference. But I don't know that it's that case. I think sometimes inhibition and fear come in and block us from our best impulses. So assuming, if you really are having trouble with what is my personal opinion about what to leave out and how to treat the figure, go to the people who, in your opinion, do it well. Since you chose to take this class, you must have seen something in Bridgman that attracted you. And these last couple of assignments have been to get you looking at what he does, including looking at what he leaves out. It takes work, which is why you're here. And let's look at what we did yesterday. We did the hip joint and leg muscles and forms. Okay, here we go. Brendan, you are blockifying. You are running cross contours around to say, I'm looking up at that leg, and it feels like my eye is down here, and that this great big giant's leg could crush my entire village. It's great. All I'm going to do in our slides of homework is cheer. If you did that on your own, if you did it without looking at anything, I'd cheer even louder. But the fact that you had to look at someone to do it, you did it. Now, you pick up this kind of thinking, and this is the kind of thinking that can make efficient invention when you choose to remove the training wheels. I had a student, in fact, it's a student who's even in here, I believe, years ago, who in the classes where we copied masters and copied masters and copied masters, at one point said, I'm kind of getting tired of copying masters. I thought, well, yeah, and you've copied masters about as well as anyone I've seen. And then moving out of the house, going out on your own for the first time, might feel like, I'd rather go back to the safe thing and copy the old masters. Well, if you feel daring and want to move out and do your own thing, it's probably time to do it. Sometimes the baby birds know it's time to go out and try my own wings. But this is a great preparation, Etienne. Olivia, these look good. Good. The rock, this is the thing. The daring to go in there and rockify. Good. Clarita, in class today, I think we're going to work on what somebody else did with that leg right there, is that you might want to, at some point, find a line that is going to tell us where things are exactly. And here's the thing I'm looking for, is what about that side plane there? But this is good for your thinking. Phoenix, you're doing it. You're choosing great examples, and then you're going in there and flinging lines down. Lily, these are really good. This is what I meant. You are responsive to feedback. You account for all of those planes. Good job, Lily. Sasha, good job, and you're experimenting with new brushes. Straight line analysis, bone analysis, muscle analysis, plane analysis, muscle on bone analysis. Jonathan, gutsy, fearless, chiseled. Sharya, lots of cross contours. Good show, everybody. Here we are today. Shoulder mechanics, arm, muscles, and forms. Most of you know who Leonardo da Vinci is. But if you're going to study drawing, and if you're going to study painting, and if you're going to study a person who has mastered multiple disciplines, Da Vinci is someone you go to. And when it comes to drawing, if you know all of his finished beautiful work, if you know some of those drapery studies he did, and then you see the stuff that he did not intend you to see, but this is one of the most encouraging things. If you did this drawing, your family might not be impressed. They wouldn't see how much knowledge there is in there. They wouldn't understand how much these little lines mean, and that simple line like that, and that simple line like that. They would not know. They would just, oh, that's nice, that's nice. You did a little messy. Maybe you could be cleaner. But what I want you to see is that when Leonardo starts a drawing, he starts a drawing in exploring mode, kid mode. Could be like this, it could be like this. Look at that leg, look at this finished leg here with the lines. Look at the one over here, look at the one over here, look at the one over here. Look at how he just changed his position a number of times. And he's also doing long lines that flow. That's instructive. Now, some of these drawings are really small. They've had the originals at the Getty Museum, and they turn the lights down quite low when you go in to see them, but you go in and it's like a holy environment. You can cover some of these drawings with a business card, and they'll cover them up. But you'll see, this is exploring, and then there's also more than exploring. There's studying. That's where he's probably doing research on corpses or on an old guy, and figuring, all right, I can see the strands of the pectoralis under the surface. And he knew this stuff, and he documented this stuff, and he put little figures on this and kept track of it, and that's the stuff we've been studying. And that was 400 plus years before Bridgman. Now, that's not the best way to study anatomy. One way to study anatomy is to go to an anatomy book, and we want to know the bones underneath, and we want to know the bones apart from each other, because the humerus and the ball and socket joint of the humerus, which can move in many different directions, and the scapula, which has a number of parts, including this big crow's beak that's as big as your finger, the coracoid process, and this thing back here, which we'll get to, and this head width collarbone, the clavicle, to assemble those and then find them under the skin and find out why we have a little pocket there and a little pocket there. In fact, I'm going to take a minute with that right now. I'm just going to show you some anatomy. On the outer third of the collarbone, see this part here? The outer third. The front fibers of the deltoid go down and around, and they hook almost halfway down. Not quite, but almost halfway down. That's the front fibers of the deltoid. There's going to be some middle fibers of the deltoid. And over here we saw that the pectoralis major, you can see how that goes like that. That pectoralis major is going to aim down. And in between those two parts, there will be a little shadow, a little concave pocket. There's stuff in there, but that becomes a little concave. And then from the back, the trapezius rolls over and it connects about 1/3 out on that collarbone. That gives us a line of continuity. That gives us a beautiful line of flow. Bridgman uses that, but if you look through, your assignment today will be to look through shoulders and arms and work from them. You'll see that line of continuity. I'm showing you an anatomical phenomenon of the subclavicular triangle and the supraclavicular triangle, that you now know why they happen. Muscles bulge, and the parts in between them may be a pocket or a groove or a cave. And this very subtle shading can flow through there. Okay. Well, we could put other muscles on there, and we will put some other muscles on there, but I want you to see what Bridgman does. Bridgman is aware that between the collarbones, there's about an eyeball's space, and look what he does. He throws this shoulder down and the collarbone comes down. It does not come down nearly as much as you might think. It's hard to push. Sit where you are and try pushing your collarbones down. They barely go. A finger or two's width, maybe a little more if you've really been into yoga. Now, this is hard to read. And I want to show you why it's hard to read. It's because he did preliminary lines. Watch this. You see how, if granted that a collarbone is opaque, it's not transparent, you can't see through it, So if I get rid of what's behind it, now it looks a little bit more understandable. It's sitting up on the surface, not underneath. Okay, but I'm going to erase that because I want to show you that part of the reason Bridgman is willing to leave that stuff in there is because it adds to what students are trying to learn. It gives an arch that connects all this, and they can see that you don't arbitrarily put these angles down when you're trying to draw like Bridgman. You figure that they are connected to a bigger thing. He's lifting up this clavicle. And by the way, that line right there, let me just watch this closely. This is subtle. That line right there is a plane break. It's telling us that this is going to face more up and this is going to face more down. And this line is gripping on the outside of that lateral third of the collarbone. What's happening then? It's burying itself underneath as all of this flesh compresses. But he's leaving that out. I know, but can you see how even a curved line like that is showing us that he knows what's going on? What about this? Look at how this, I don't see the muscles in there. I don't see the muscles in there either. Here he's deciding to just make this thing grip around a ball. Does it happen that way on a figure? You tell me. I've never seen a figure where it does that. But a front shoulder, which can be thought of a cannonball, and that cannonball sits in front of the rib cage. Oh, if this thing is facing this way, that cannonball might sit on the other side of this rib cage, and we'd have something like that. See, that doesn't look like a figure yet, but it sure does look like something three-dimensional. And once we have something like that, then we've got a something to build other three-dimensional forms. Watch this next line. You see, I'm thinking of that as three-dimensional. I'm thinking of that as three-dimensional. If there's an arm wedged into it, I think of that as three-dimensional, and I might do what he does, which is to think of it as a 2x4. And what we're going to see today, watch this, we're really going to see this today. I might see that forearm as a block that has its secondary axis long this way, and that those two wedge together. That's building a body out of synthetic form. Now, back to this shoulder. It's a thing. Watch this photograph that Bridgman certainly knew about. Well, that looks pretty much like one individual or one separated component wedged into the side of there. And we see all over this figure, look at that reflected light, core shadow, reflected light, core shadow, reflected light. Oh, here we go. Deltoid, wedged in. And it has its own core shadow and reflected light. Back to Bridgman. That could be inspired by looking at the model. Why not exaggerate that? Let's take a look at this one. Well, we see the thing we've seen since day one, everybody. That he has got a thick thing, a three-dimensional form underneath there. It's a beach ball with a center line on it. And watch, I want you to see some of these continuity lines. These would have probably happened early in his drawing. Look at that line and look at that line. And here's a really big deal. Do you see these little dots? I'm going to erase them in a moment, but watch me put them down. Do you see those little dots? I think that those dots are because he was putting continuity lines in there, rhythm lines. Do you see this dot right here? I think he's trying to look through there and see how that's going to flow up into there. Training yourself to see this is a whole other discipline than anatomy, but it's a discipline that Bridgman in his book points out. Now let's look at anatomy. We've looked at some grace and continuity of lines in there. Look at how they say, watch out for the pin the tail on the donkey phenomenon with anatomy. Michelangelo's law of the open form, where if you pour water into it, it can always get through because you open up areas and don't outline everything too heavily. Well, Michelangelo didn't always do that. He did do it often. This certainly doesn't seem to be doing it. You could almost throw a shadow in there and say, watch this. This arm can be taken off as a separate piece. Now I'm going to get rid of my lines. You can say, all right, he did let the form open there. And I bet that was conscious. But what we want to see for anatomy is that there's a bunch of stuff going on in there. There's this. What is that? Is it deltoid or is it teres major? I gotta tell you, it's teres major, it's deltoid. You say, but the deltoid wouldn't go there. Well, that's tricep. We're going to look at the back of a figure and we're going to see what those muscles are specifically. And you're going to find that this is a tough one. But the shoulder girdle is what we're studying in the next number of minutes. We're starting it already. Deltoid's the most famous shoulder muscle. We're going to look at the tricep and the olecranon process and this little bump here. We may have time for this ridge group. But again, I want to go back to Da Vinci. I want to go back to something less impressive. Look at that drawing on the right. Now, the horse head itself is a beautiful example of drawing, that core shadow. Look how he blocks the side of that horse's masseter, which horses do have. But over here, folks, the pentimenti, the little repentances, the drawing it this way, and look at this. That is to tell us that he's seeking a direction of the shoulders like this. Look at this. I'm not sure what that is to tell us. It may be that he's trying to find an angle like that and an angle like that for the spine of the scapula, but I don't think there's any question what this one is and what this one is. I'm going to switch to red. Look at this and this. Those are two lines. I think he's looking for either a back plane of the arm, or maybe he's thinking it more anatomically than that. Maybe he's saying the humerus would come back to there, and he didn't bother to draw the epicondyles. But that's a good way to start. If it makes you feel any better about yourself, it isn't the way to end. At some point he's going to do this. You say, what is that? I've looked in the anatomy books and I can't find stuff like that. Anyone want to guess what he's doing here? I have a pretty good guess, and I don't know this from having read the journals on it. He is probably doing a topographical study of a real person who would not have looked anything like that for their texture. Right? It's got pen and ink marks all over the place. But he's figuring, there's this part, here's where fat resides, here's where that external oblique goes. There's certainly no, what happened to the latissimus dorsi, which should be going along there and holding that teres major. He's really accentuated that trapezius. This is a separate study. And it's a study. This is less of a study and more of an exploration. This is a finished anatomical plate. When you learn anatomy of the human body, some parts are easy, some parts are hard. I think for difficulty, the hardest part is the shoulder girdle. because it has layer on layer on layer that artists care about, and then more layer under that that artists don't care about. But artists have at least 3 sets of layers on certain parts of the back. Okay, here's what we're going to find out. We're going to find out there's a muscle that goes from there and tucks up underneath there, and it's a big round muscle. Teres means round, major means big. We're going to find out that underneath the spine, there's 2 muscles, infraspinatus and teres minor. We've got another muscle above the spine, supraspinatus, that's going to go in there, and it's going to spin the same way that teres major would. It's going to spin medially. We've also got over the top of that, down here, we're going to have a latissimus dorsi that will hold that teres major, like in a sling. And then on top of that, we're going to have a trapezius that goes like that and goes down to that 12th rib. And then on top of that, we're going to have a deltoid. Are you happy? Well, you ought to be happy, because without those muscles, you would not be able to love or fight. So those are an advantage. But what do we do with them? Well, let's just see. Let's see what a great drawer of Bridgman's time did. Look what he did. Now, this has got a lot of difference from Bridgman. Bridgman uses core shadows around the edge of the form to make it so that they are more cartoony. Look what Kley does. Scratch, 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 scratch. He puts lots of texture in there. But it's still the same language. I want to show you one of the things about this language. Look at that deltoid, and look at how simply he's thought of it. Watch this. In fact, I'm going to zoom in. He has got a shape like this, and then like that, and then like that. And he said the light's coming from this way, and so he doesn't even use core shadows. He uses a very loose line to give us some thickness to it. What's going on with that anatomically? What's this part? That part is a part that Heinrich Kley would have had a teacher in Germany, a class where you learned every aspect of this anatomy, and then he did what he chose with. What does Bridgman show us? He's showing us that there's a thing like that. Anyone know what that thing is? I'm going to look over at the chat to see if anyone knows what that thing is. That's the acromion process. One of you in this class who was with me when I was teaching anatomy in the 90s told me that you had no trouble learning all of the bones and landmarks because you just made up mnemonic devices for it. And I remember you telling me that you always thought of the acromion process as a great big chrome bumper, and you never forgot that it was the acromion process. Well, Bridgman will show you in the book how the scapula has a vertebral border and what's called the spine of the scapula. It's a great big thick portion of the bone of the scapula. It's like a separate bone in itself that sticks out. And it'll have muscles underneath there and muscles above there. And those 2 lines are the important landmarks on the body. And if you want to get refined with them, Bridgman shows you that the ball and socket of the humerus is on an arc that is different from the way the scapula will spin. Here he's showing that the center is somewhere around where I know this is hard, where the collarbone on the front articulates with the acromion process in the spine of the scapula. Now, you can find that in the anatomy books. Over there on the front, there's a collarbone. It's got ligaments that hold it to the acromion process. Look at that acromion process. That acromion process is a big platform that you can feel on the outside, the most outside part of your shoulder that's hard. Put your fingers there and press down, and then there'll be a little soft part after that. That's the acromion process. It always faces basically up and back. And it is the place around which those complex fibers of the deltoid, which are quite flat in the back, and then start to spread out and bulge here before they go down into the arm. That plateau is always tappable as a plateau upward. That's what was going on here. That little subtlety is someone who knows anatomy and doesn't put it all in. Instead, he's got so much dark, unlike Bridgman, who the drawings are mostly light, with a little bit of a core shadow and darkness. Kley goes in there and sculpts with rim light. That is, the light is coming this way. And so it can hit certain parts and then it can't get in over the other side. Say, well, I thought you said it was coming this way. If he is changing directions, there is a term for that. It's called jumping the light. You can do whatever you want to with the light. Maybe more like something like that. But it can't get beyond that, so that means most of this is going to be dark. Now watch, here's the reason why I mentioned it. That means that that light shape becomes part of his shape language, part of his composition. What about Bridgman? Mostly light with those little bits of dark, but again, the same thing. We are seeing that anatomy in your studies affects little decisions. Okay, I'm going to give you another slide, two more slides on this shoulder girdle. Let's take the skin off of this side. Look at this. Look at this. What is all of that stuff? Well, dear students, there you go. You take away that deltoid. Gosh, I want the deltoid back. I want the deltoid back. I don't want to deal with all of that. That's one thing to do. If you're learning simple anatomy, if you're learning mannequin anatomy, if you're learning basic how to draw comics the Marvel way of the 60s where you want to do superheroes and you want to make them look somewhat anatomical, you don't have to know all this stuff. You get some cannonball shoulders and then you chisel those cannonballs so that they look more like eggs, and you chisel them so they look a little stronger, and you'll get it. But there is underneath and above and in there a tangle. And yesterday Jonathan asked which ones of these muscles spin which way. The best book in the world on this. For all of those secrets, one of you was talking about it yesterday. You know how much I think of this book, and you know it's a hard book, but these parts aren't hard. He's got dozens of pages in there where he's going to show you this is sophisticated anatomy. The part underneath the spine of the scapula reaches out. That is infraspinatus and teres minor. They reach out to the outside of that humerus, and when they pull like a spool of tape that will laterally rotate the arm. Whereas underneath there, the teres major along with the latissimus dorsi, which is all, when that pulls, it's going to medially rotate the arm. Well, this may be more anatomy than I should have attempted in this class. Some of you have let me know that if you want to take anatomy, go to the anatomy courses. I'm showing you this to let you know this. The shoulder girdle, the most important thing about the shoulder is this line, because you can always find it no matter how whispered it may be. There's a few times when you get just the right amount of flesh there and just the right amount of flesh there that it would disappear. But for the most part, it's either going to be a projection or a groove. And then here's a hard part. You don't worry about that part up in there. That part up in there is buried underneath the top part of that blade. Once you have this at a little more open at a right angle, you will have the spine of the scapula that will go out there, and that gets confusing. If you're following this, if you have not tuned out, it gets confusing because of the way layers go over the top of it. and tendons don't grow and muscles do. That's what we look for. So when we see this guy, wow, wow, that is a vertebral border of the scapula. How did it get that far out? It has muscles on the other side that pulled as hard as they could. Where is that spine of the scapula? I'm making a convex to the top line going over there. Let's get in tighter on it. Wow! This is what muscle? Anyone know? That is the latissimus dorsi. This must be what? That's the teres major. Those two do the same thing. They're going to go up to the inside of the arm on the other side. Well, that means that up in here must be those other two, and this must be, oh, it sure is. That's the deltoid going to the outside of the arm. Lateral epicondyle, medial epicondyle. That's our croquet mallet hammer. That is tricep. Gosh, Marshall, I can't see all those things. Yeah, that's why you study them in the books. And then eventually you'll say, I see them. And that is Bridgman lighting. That's single source sunlight with most of the form in the halftone area, the light area. Okay, I think we've studied enough of the shoulder girdle. We'll look at a couple more. It's there. It's there. That's really foreshortened over there. Like that. Where's this going? Up to there. There's that plateau. That's the most important thing. Getting the shoulder blade. Getting the muscles on top of it. Bridgman is showing us from the front. Let me orient you. You see, we can't see the shoulder blade from the front. But we can see the collarbone going out and those two little triangles. Let's look at what Bridgman gives us. That is a drawing that just confuses beginners. I looked at it when I was in my early 20s and I thought, how am I going to learn how to draw the figure from that? He's telling us, by the way, that the teres major on the back hooks lower than the latissimus dorsi, which is also coming from the back, which hooks higher on there. And when they pull, they'd spin the arm that way. He's telling us that that outer third of the clavicle has a deltoid that's going to go in there and hook to pull and lift the arm up like the gluteus medius did on the leg. It's an abductor, pulls the limb away. One thing we see is that the roundness of that rib cage is a thing. But you cannot see the roundness of the rib cage there on the back. Because on the back, you've got a great big area that covers it up. But from the front, when you raise the arm, the pectoralis is less wide than the latissimus. And so the armpit grips in there. We could think of it as a concavity. It's going to have convexities in it. But that armpit, which is narrower in the front than in the back, tells us that we will see some evidence of that. What's going on in here? We'll get to that. We'll get to that. That's useful even in quick sketches. What else do we see here? Well, he isn't taking the time when he puts an axis like that and an axis like that. He isn't taking the time to scrunch this up, Lily. But look what he's doing over here. He is taking the time to concave that because that's what happens when you stretch something flexible. He is showing us that when you lift that portion of the deltoid goes in front of that portion of the trapezius. And where'd that clavicle go? It went back underneath there and it tucked up underneath there. Can't see it. It's buried inside that mound. Let's deal with this one. We're going to take 10 minutes on this probably. But I'm going to catch my breath because you're going to need to catch your breath too. Because I'm going to take a lot out of this. It will be repeat observations. We looked at another muscle man whose face we could see. This guy whose face we can't see. Gives him a little more mystery. Now, I need to apologize in advance for something. I publicly criticized Bern Hogarth's teaching back in 1989-90 when we went to a week with him. That he would do a drawing and he'd go in there and name every muscle while he was drawing. And if you did not already know anatomy, all you were doing was listening to a guy chant sounds. Well, I'm going to do something like that if you don't know anatomy. But it doesn't mean this won't be useful. It means that you'll say, I'll know those someday. I might know those in the next few months. How long should it take to learn anatomy? Maybe a year. Depend on how much you want to know. 6 months. If you want a real simple schematic, you could learn anatomy in a month or 2, maybe 3, but someday. For those of you who know anatomy, I hope to open your eyes to some things. This is the same position, and we've got the principle of overlap going on. I want to show you something about the principle of overlap. Look at this line. He is showing us that this thoracic arch, that rib cage in there, look how he caught it up there. Apparently these lines got erased. But on his drawing, with the full value charcoal, there might have been little dots that would go through there. He's telling us that this rib cage is closer to us than that teres major and latissimus dorsi. The principle of overlap is one of the most useful things that a child understands. That if you put this line in front of that line, it looks like this is closer than the other one. But it doesn't necessarily mean that that one's closer. All you'd have to do is just reverse the overlap, and you'd have the opposite arrangement. Same basic outline, opposite arrangement. Overlap is a powerful tool, both for composition and for drafting. That little line tells us, why are you making a big deal out of that, Marshall? Let me tell you why. When you look at a fleshed human being, you might find a complex pattern of light in there and not know how to interpret. And as soon as you got daring and you decided to press down on the charcoal like that, hoping that that was going to look good, so that it does something like that, it's going to look wrong because it means I don't know anatomy. Look how low that scapula is. Remember, that's coming off of the scapula. He's telling us that that scapula is all the way down there. Would it be down there? That's a liberty. How about the external oblique? He's got the serratus magnus that go into the back of the scapula. And then what has he got? He's got, let's count them. 1, 2, 3.5 lines to show us an external oblique. Over here, he doesn't have that. He's got 1, 2.5 maybe to show us that the external oblique goes on there, and he may have had more lines on there. Underneath them, if we were to draw this the way it should look on an anatomical plate, we'd get rid of that portion of the thoracic arch and put the muscle over it. but he is leaving that in there. Oh, how much more there is here. I'm going to look at how, when this curves that way, somehow it makes us feel, I have a feeling that that little dot right there, that was a part of a line that went like that to tell us that this is going away. And look how here it's going up that way. It's starting to go the other way. This portion right here even looks like we've got something coming out of there. Every line on there is part of the preparation of the great big egg form and then the subordinate forms on it. Now let's get up to the arm. I think the point I'm making is that these little whispers are whispers of sentences that are quite precise. Let's go up to this arm. It's doing the same thing that the other strong man did. It's casting a shadow, only this shadow looks to me very much like a Smilodon skeleton from the side, where the jaw goes like that. You got a canine here. That looks like, now you say, was he thinking of a Smilodon skeleton? Probably not. Be very unlikely, but I see in it. So why are you saying that if he didn't see it? Well, do you think he was aware of that shape as a something? A nutcracker? Or a man standing with a cape flowing behind him? I'll answer for you. No, maybe not. So here's another question. Do you think he was aware of that shape as a shape? Now we're on confident ground. He was aware of that shape as a shape. An artist at this level is aware of shapes. If that's hard to believe, you have lots of work ahead. Seeing shapes as abstractions and likening the shapes to something else helps you kick into that mode. Now, here's what I want you to see that's amazing. This abstract shape, which he may not have been thinking of some abstract shape, he was just aware of it. This part right here that made that big canine of the Smilodon happens to land conveniently, watch, it lands conveniently where it continues that ribcage. He could have made that shadow fall hard in there, and it would have made sense because the ribcage is tucking in there. He just decided that he wanted to open it up. Look how this outline the outlines go thick and thin, and they have dark parts in there, and then they got little parts where he fills it in like that, so that he's stroking that line as an abstract and straightening. Look at these lines where the thoracic arch meet the interdigitation, where the muscle from behind, serratus magnus, interdigitates with the external oblique. And look how they look. I'll erase what I did. I'm just pointing them out. They look like little sonata notes. These are the kinds of things that a baby can love, not because it represents a human, but because it's a texture that they might want to put their hand on. That's the micro stuff. Let's go up here. The pectoralis. That is a deltoid. That is a pectoralis. This bicep and the muscle underneath it, the brachialis, they are pulling this way, and when they do that, they swell up. That's all tricep. Notice core shadow and reflected light. This is the coracobrachialis, the little triangle in there that will go from this bump of the coracoid process, this bump of the coracoid process into the arm. But it's not seen here because it's underneath. When a person lifts their arm, there it goes, a little triangle in there. And if you want to see it, sometimes it's hard to see. I don't see it there. It is in there. You see it on basketball players and swimmers. One of you in here went to the Body World show with me back in those years that we were going to the Body World show. And I remember walking around to every human body that was taken apart, looking for the coracobrachialis, and I couldn't find it. And I started to think maybe it's a myth. Maybe somebody made up and they wanted to see whether they could pull it off. But no, that's not the thing. It's just that in the Body World show, that first one, they were shriveled up. And so they'd get lost in this network of nerves and fibers in there. But there is a part like that. There's a bicep, there's a tricep, there's different parts. What I want you to see is that Bridgman is doing two things here. He is using what he knows of anatomy, and he is choosing how to treat them with the light and with leaving things out. Can you tell that this looks like a concave ramp? You come over like that, and then the snow goes like that, and then it goes like that. And how does it look that way? There's no detail in there. He's pulling it off with the things at the edge. Look at the accentuating the convexity of that. And then because this line and this line go like that, we start to fill in a sense of concavity in there. Remember that the scapula is one small part. It's an important part, but the gesture of the whole figure is going to be more important. And the way many an artist does it, let's go back to what I think Da Vinci was doing, is that in his early stages, he was concerned with that, and maybe that, and maybe that. And certainly that, because he's got a number of lines that go like that. You know, Peck's book has some of the best things for looking at a back view and placing the scapulae on there. But I think maybe the best way to go about this is to just get a bunch of photographs and see where they land. Well, that one's hard, but look what it shows us. That's all what, folks? What is that? Latissimus dorsi. It comes from all the way back there on the sacrum. And look how it tucks underneath that teres minor. And that teres minor would be coming from the base of the scapula. There it is. There's the vertebral border of the scapula. And the spine of the scapula is going over the hill there. Now, when you look at enough of this, look over here. There's that infraclavicular fossa, because the deltoid is coming forward and the pectoralis is going back, and they're pinching together and they're accentuating that part. Ooh, tremendous foreshortening there. Makes it hard to read. Let's take another one. I'm going to zoom in on it. Everybody, if you don't know what that muscle is by now, that's latissimus dorsi, because it goes convex to the front. But I think what we're seeing is that part of it might be tendinous as it's going into there. So that means this one is what? It's got to be teres major. That is deltoid. Let's take a look at him from the back. Oh, there you go. That's the vertebral border. Where's the other part? Look at these strands over there that make it hard to see the other part, but it's got to be something like that. What's this other one? It's easy to find the spine of the scapula on that one because it's a plane break. But look at that. This is a way to research and see what happens on real bodies. Now that you know some of these parts. You know, this guy is so well cut. He reminds me of a guy named Steve. He was a model who was so lean, you could see every fiber of his muscles. And at the end of one of our sessions, he said, you know, I play the violin. He said, if you want me to do my last pose where I play the violin, I'm happy to do that. So we had him play the violin in front of the class while he posed. And while he posed, you could see every ripple of the way the infraspinatus, teres minor, teres major, supraspinatus, underneath the trapezius, they were all just going like crazy as he moved the bow on the violin. That's research. Look over here. The light's coming from above. You can see how it casts the shadow of an arm on there. This part, when that guy brings his arm back, how far back? Look over here and we can see he's really bringing that thing up. He's bringing it up this way. When he does so, there are not just arm muscles working. There would be a pectoralis minor on the front that would be pulling this over and lifting that up, and then look how we've got that little pocket of down plane. By the time he lets go of it, this has started to roll back this way. It's not so far back, and now this is casting a shadow all the way along the back. Here's your assignment. Choose 7 of your favorite Bridgman arms. That's just like you did yesterday. Yeah, we moved from arms to legs. Copy them to understand their anatomy and form. I don't know anatomy and form yet. Well, this is a good time to be starting on it. You know some anatomy and form. You know biceps and triceps. You know deltoids. If you can, add cross contours to clarify forms. Okay. I see that happening all the time in the homework and in what you're demonstrating. Here's a toughie. Attempt rim light to make one form overlap another. What's that mean? It means that notice how much shade is in these. See, this isn't rim light, but it's light that's about halfway through. And that area of light and the shade, the shadow that it makes there, that then, notice there's no cast shadow, that then he cuts into that. This is a form in front, closer to us than another form, and it's cutting into that. That light could almost be coming toward us this way, so that it's going to hit this plane that's facing off that way and not get to the other side. Comic book artists love rim light. Professional photographers love to put the sun behind a person. Why would you put the sun behind a person? Most amateurs avoid that. Because if you do put the sun behind of a person, it makes a halo around their hair, for example. If you can, add cross contours to clarify forms. I'm just going to go ahead and do it here. Normally, if that is a cylinder, if I want to minimize how much dark I put in there, I put a core shadow and reflected light, and it makes it look thick. I might make a little bit of light over here. But you can do the other thing. If that is a cylinder, you could say that the core shadow is going to be up here, and then all of this is going to be in shade. And it will vary. It might get even, if it's got a cast shadow underneath there, it might be that it stays darkest here and gradually gets lighter as it goes down there. But the core, darkest part of the shadow will be there. And of course, for that to make any difference, what do we need? We need a we need a background that is dark. And if you get a background that is dark, then that strip of light across there reads as three-dimensional. And those rim lights can be done just like the contour lines were done, where this dark part tells us that it's in front of that. It could have been the other way around. That portion could have been light. And it would tell us that this form is closer to us than the part behind it. Rim light can act like a contour that overlaps a form, showing us that that's closer. If you can, add cross contours to clarify forms, attempt rim light to make one form overlap another. If you can't, here's another thing you can do. Just look at these arms and assess them as silhouettes. Say, I don't know the three-dimensional stuff yet, and I don't even know the anatomy stuff yet, but if I take some time to just see them as flat shapes, as rhythm recitals, and you see right there, I might get daring. I might get daring and do a little rim light. You see how that little sliver of rim light made this wrist feel like it's coming forward out of that form behind it. But if you copy these, look at that little bump right there. That's an anatomical landmark. I know, Marshall said so. That is a flexor group. Just copying these things as shapes, not trying too hard to get the three-dimensionality of it, can be a good influence on you, but you might just not be able to stand it and say, I have got to put some of those cross contours on there because I know a little bit about them, and you'll dare to do it. And if you dare to do it, you're moving in the direction of how to create your own form. Yeah, cross contours. All right, let's see what else. That's a good slide of arms right there. That's extending the fist by pulling on the extensors back there. What group of muscles goes from the medial epicondyle, the inside bump on your arm, that thing right there, into the palm, the flexors? Some people know it. What group of muscles goes from the lateral epicondyle, and two of them, and they have the name, one of them has the name in there, go into the back of the palm? That's this group, which are that group proper, and then this is a ridge group. I watched the chat to see if anyone knows. The extensors, they're the opposite. Gosh, that's hard, Marshall. Am I going to learn that from Bridgman? No. But Bridgman does have it in there. That is a flexor group. That is an extensor group. That is a segment of the extensor group called the ridge group, or the supinators is what they used to call them, that goes from the outside of the arm into the thumb side. He's got a famous slide that shows this. You see, this is the outside of an arm. That's a lateral epicondyle. That's a radius. That's an ulna. Let's switch to red. About a fourth of the way down in that area there is a group of muscles that spirals down into the thumb side. Where's the thumb side? The thumb can move. That's why that's complicated. We would see in this position, we'd see some of the front, and then down here, we'd see some of the underside. That way, that's spinning around from here on the outside over to the thumb side. Look how these rubber bands go that way, and then they change their direction. And then he says, I'm not thinking of them as two strips of muscle. I'm thinking of them as a single mass that's going to be there. And that explains why on so many of these arms, he's got a group. Look how it cuts into there. Cuts into there because it came from the outside of that humerus, and it spiraled into the thumb side, and he leaves most of it out. Here he really accentuates those two muscles that make this radical ramp. Now I want to show you a set of slides of my favorite Bridgman arms. That's a back view. Here's what I have you do. That lets us know it's coming this way toward us. There's that ulna. It's going over to the little finger side. The hand is in pronation. Radius is crossing over. And he's saying, yeah, I'm thinking that way. So he didn't put those cross contours on the skeleton. Why do you make us do it? Do it. It's a way to learn anatomy. But look what he does show us. He says that the tricep is this huge muscle, a lot like the quadriceps on the front of the thigh, and that this is a lot like the patella that goes down into the tibia. And in this case, there is no rectus femoris that goes over the top of it, but there are 3 triceps, like there are 4 quadriceps. And the patella is separate from the lower leg, but the olecranon process of the ulna, this part right here, the elbow, is fused into what would be the tibia of the arm. So it's very much like, that might be worth looking at this back of an arm and comparing it to the front of a leg. What else have we got here? We've got the elbow wedging into a group of muscles. What group of muscles is that? That egg is what group of muscles? The flexors. They're a great big thick egg, the Popeye part of your forearm. And they are convex, and they wedge into a blocky wrist. And what happens with that wrist? The way the bone actually is quite concave because there's going to be tendons, carpal tunnel in underneath there, and the tendons of the flexors will go through there. Hey, if you really want it simple, he says, here's what I think of when I draw an arm in that position. I think like this and like this. Can you get that? Yeah, I can get that, George. Okay, good. You're on your way. Now we're going to do some more. Look at this. I know it's hard to see, but look at that. He says there's 2 muscles that are going to actually wrap around there, and that's going to be a ridge group. Those are going to be those supinators. And then he gets organic on us, and then he goes graphic on us, and he shows us rhythm lines in one way or another, and straights and curves and exaggerates stuff. This is a slide that sort of summarizes what Bridgman teaches. This is anatomy. This is form with a little anatomy imposed on the form or found in the form, and then more specific groups of muscles and the finished arm and the rhythms he was thinking of. Okay, you got your homework. Would you like to see some Heinrich Kley and some A.B. Frost as a little? Let's start with A.B. Frost. Look at that patch of shadow on the right side shoulder. That's a cast shadow, not a form shadow. He could have left it out, He left out a lot of other cast shadows, but it balances the fact that he's got a big ear over here and he's got a little weight on the left. That's an approximate symmetry composition. He's got this patch of dark of the hair over here, so he needs some weight over there. He's got this newspaper on this side and not on this side, but he's got a cast shadow over there. That's showing us that he's thinking like what Bridgman talks about rhythms. I used to hate his line quality. I think it's haystacky. Now I like it. Sometimes when you get old and numb, you just got to roll around in a cactus bed now and then to feel alive. These are done, that haystacky quality of line comes from a stiff pin. A pin that when you pull it down onto the paper, it doesn't do this kind of thing in a single stroke. It does this kind of thing. Not a comfortable line. But what I want you to see, what are we looking at? We're looking at his audacity with this figure. He does the open thing of when something is stretched out, he leaves little areas that are open, breaks the line. All great pen and ink masters do something like that. And on this side where it's closed in, he's likely to darken it, but not entirely. Those are choices. Look at the little use of cast shadows, like right here, to tuck that part of the hand in. We're going to study hands tomorrow. That's a beautifully understood hand. And it's such an abstract line. Look at how that part right there tells us that this is closer to us. And we've got the convexity of the hand and the knuckle. Look at how when he lifted his arms up, the drapery bundled up there. Let's go back to the full view. There is someone who is before Bridgman. Look at his dates. He was born 14 years before Bridgman. And he died 8 years after Bridgman's first book came out. And he was a United States American. But I want you to see that he exemplifies the stuff that Bridgman is teaching us. It's the same lighting schemes, it's the same knowledge. The hand, look at that cast shadow connecting that hand. And I've wondered how much he worked the preliminary drawing. I've wondered how many times he redrew. Those shoes, for example, they look perfectly flung. I wonder whether, like Kim Jung-gi, he saw it that way in his imagination. Or like Frazetta, the stories of Frazetta doing that, where they just put it down right the first time. Or whether like Leyendecker, or Rockwell, or Stanley Kubrick, tried several positions and deliberated over them, or even obsessed over them to get them positioned just right. And there's no way to know without knowing, because artists can have very different approaches to that. I suspect in this case it was a little of both. I think he worked from strong pre-visualization. I think he had it strongly in his mind what he wanted, and I suspect it took him multiple attempts with pencil to get what he wanted, but I don't know. It's just a guess from experience. And I've seen some of these originals. Look at the straight line quality of this. See, that's planned, the way that strong vertical as the foundation of him makes all of the chaos more meaningful. Look at the little bit of atmospheric perspective here that throws that leg behind his butt, and the cast shadow that throws that arm behind his coat. Now, I've mentioned that A.B. Frost and Heinrich Kley were working at the same time that Bridgman was. And how much they have in common. This looks like more what Heinrich Kley would do with all of the pin lines. This looks more like what Bridgman would do. But there is a big difference between A.B. Frost and Heinrich Kley, and that is Frost and Kley are almost always telling a story. Not always. Sometimes it's just a portrait, but even if it's a portrait, with Kley or with Frost, there's a curiosity about why is that person so strange or so sad, and it implies a story. Bridgman doesn't do that. His stuff, as the experts would say, is more iconic than narrative. But with A.B. Frost, almost always a story. Now let's zoom in on these guys. Well, I could talk for too long about it. I don't want to go on too long. Can you see that that is an elbow? That's an olecranon process. He's aware of it. That's a folded area, and he's made some squash there. This would be more useful, I think, since they're clothed figures. This would be more useful with a pen and ink technique course to look at the golden age of pen and ink illustrators, which is about 100 years ago. Let's move to Kley. Look what Kley knows. Look what he's got here. He's got lines that tell us that that plane of the whole back shoulder girdle is going behind. Where's the latissimus dorsi there? You're not showing the latissimus dorsi. He is showing something more like the sacrospinalis in there. And he's looking at what they look like on a fleshed character. Actually, he's making this up. But he knows to make a plane break and cross contours. And he's putting his shade lines on there as if they were cross contours on a ball. Isn't this stuff great? I don't know that I would send you to Kley to study arms. That would even be harder than Bridgman. But when I look at this, I see someone who knows an arm. That is the curve of the radius, exaggerated to look more characteristic, as Robert Beverly Hale would say, more characteristic of itself than it actually is. Look at those legs. Can you see Kley starting? What is this? I think it's a preliminary line. I think it's a rhythm line. Wow. End of the ulna, core shadow, reflected light. Big gnarly knuckles, rhythm lines going into it. Two more. A lion's arm, a cat's arm is very much like a human arm. The difference you find mostly up here because they have a strap of skin that holds that elbow to the side, but when you flay it, that looks like a human forearm. A cat's arm looks like a little monkey arm when it's flayed. Look at that concave there, pulling on that core shadow, reflected light. Thumb and fingers. Foreshortened arm, look at that. Great big group of flexors. Little line like that coming toward us, little open bit there. Lots and lots of lines. That's a stiff pin too. Almost looks like a bamboo pin. Here's what I'm recommending. Lost Art Books, Picture This Press. That's for your information to go purchase if your heart desires. Let's see where we are. Let's go to our assignment. Redraw at least 3 from memory in 1 minute or less. Why? Because with some of these, like this one, you could figure that there's something thick this way. I remember it being thick that way. And then there's something thick this way. I remember it being thick that way. And somehow I'm going to get those two together. And then it changes direction again and it goes thick that way so that it's a block like that. Doesn't look like an arm yet, but my golly, I know this has a thick this way, thick that way, thick this way. What about the other way? Yeah, we can do it the other way too, especially when he pronates his arm. Now, what's that going to do? I didn't do it. I didn't draw an arm, but I did get the idea that Bridgman is looking for this way, that way, this way, that way, and he's doing it with form. That might be an interesting way to practice a 1-minute drawing, and then you start to notice deltoid thick this way, biceps and triceps thicker that way, ridge group thicker that way, wrist in pronated position at least. That's one way to practice rhythm and gesture in drawings, gesture of forms. Is there another way? Yeah. The fact that this goes like this, and 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 then get too much of that kind of thing, and it's going to go like this, and then a hook like that. That's what you might do in a 30-second drawing. Well, let's take a look at a Bridgman that we haven't spent much time with. When I was cropping this slide, I almost cropped out this part down here. And I thought, no, I want to keep that in there. Why? Look how much he's showing us there. That's an anatomy study. Cross contours galore, sometimes with the fibers of the muscles, sometimes at cross fibers of the muscles to show that it's going away from us. That's the technical stuff. This has so many portions to the rectus abdominis. Watch, everybody. Why does that hook like that? I think it hooks like that because he did things like that. He practiced those lines that he told us about. That's why I will suggest with your fast drawings of arms that you rehearse them for things that might not make any sense anatomically. But I think those are some of the most beautifully drawn arms I've ever seen, and even though they're probably terrible reproductions, if we were to see the originals, they'd probably have a whole bunch of preliminary drawing. But I think there's something about just what's left over. They're such expressive, dig into the paper with a chisel so that it actually almost tears the fibers of the paper, and then takes a tricep, and you can almost feel that part going into there, and that plane goes like that, that if we were to shade it, it might be some, you can almost feel it, but of course, he left it out. Here's what he showed us, that is two muscles that will hook into that bone. And then look what he did. He changes the direction of that line, and it gives us a little underplane, gives us a little shading there. And look what happens. They go over onto the other side of the extensors. Those of you who know anatomy, you know what I'm talking about. That's the extensors. There are those muscles that earlier he showed us were an egg. Now he's taking that egg and chiseling it right there to make it a hard plane break. And it's also showing us that these muscles are pulling that way and hardening that muscle, that group of muscles, and pulling on these. Why? Because it's pulling the arm up that way. What's this strange thing? Well, that's the olecranon process. He's turned it into a very wedged, like a big tent spike. Has he done that elsewhere on these arms? I think he has. Let's see. Yeah. That's a thick thing cutting into there. Has he done it elsewhere? Let's see what other one. Oh, yeah, look at that. A tent spike digging in. That's olecranon process of the ulna. Let's go back to these ones that I love so much. Let's see, that would be the end of the ulna. If that's the beginning of the ulna and it digs underneath there, it goes all the way through there to the end of the ulna. This would be the, again, he's sharpening the angle of that flexor group. Here he's saying what he didn't say up here. Those are two muscles wrapping around, but he treats them as one. Look what he does over on the right. He says there's actually this one. That's the extensor carpi radialis longus. And there's this one, which is the brachioradialis. It goes from the humerus into the radius, brachioradialis. This one, extensor carpi radialis longus. It goes all the way back into the carpal mass. And I'm going to erase my lines. Watch this. He's treating them as two separate muscles here. Maybe because they're pulling. Look how that beautiful little calligraphic line, that beautiful little line tells us that that plane is breaking, and it's breaking over there too. You can almost feel the belly of the tricep as it melds into the tendon of the tricep. Tomorrow we'll look at this thenar eminence of the hand and how thick it is. We're going to cover a lot tomorrow, so I'm slowing down pace for the next 5 minutes. But let me see if there's quite a few other questions. How does Bridgman treat the brachialis as it's, let's take a look at the guy that's lifting his arm. It's the pillow muscle. The pillow muscle means that it's underneath. This is the brachialis. The bicep sits on top, and as Robert Beverly Hale says, it takes all of the credit. Like some successful men who their wives are behind the scenes doing all the work. That's the brachialis. It's doing the real work of pulling on the, what bone does the brachialis pull on? I want to see what kind of anatomists we have in here. It pulls on the ulna, yes. What bone does the biceps pull on? He knows where it's going. It's going into the radius, and it's a supinator. Peck shows that really well. Just that right there, that line in front of that line says that he knows about the flexor group, and that the bicep is going in between and over to the radius on the outside, which is spun over. Oh, there's so much in these that if you are a beginner, if you can't add cross contours to clarify forms and understand their anatomy and form and attempt rim light, you can at least let the influence of George Bridgman with, this is what one of you asked earlier about his rhythm and lines. I think that this line went down like this. I think that if he did a little preliminary drawing under there, that he was this unself-conscious. He might have gone slower, but if he went slower, he didn't go more hesitantly. He just would have enjoyed the ride of the charcoal. There is some value in that. Did you know that Nicolaides' first exercise before gesture drawing is contour drawing, where he has you spend hours and hours pretending like your pencil is moving at the same rate that your eye is moving? As others have pointed out, it's a much misunderstood exercise. But Nicolaides' main set of opposites in training is slow and fast. One of the things you can do is you can notice, as you go through all of Bridgman's arms, how he treats them differently, and how he treats them similar to legs. Look at how on this forearm he's got that Gatling gun quality of hacking out this plane and sticking a 2x4 into it. And look at how on the leg he's doing something similar, hacking that out and putting something in there. Why is he doing that? It's his preference. He chooses to. Bridgman is unpredictable. That can throw you off. Bridgman is brilliant. That can send you in the direction of giving you permission to do this. If you are having a hard time with the amount I'm putting on you for homework, you can at least go through the book and just look at all of the arms. Just enjoy them. See them as something that you will arrive at that level of skill someday. Okay, that is our ending of July 31st, Shoulder Mechanics, Arm Muscles and Forms. Tomorrow, hands and feet, Bridgman in context. We will go the full 2 hours. Hands and feet we're going to try to cover in an hour. Bridgman in context and what next for your education. Just let me turn off the sharing here. But the plan right now is that I'm going to do something that's like one of these webinars. We're going to start a composition workshop that will go on for 3 or 4 months, because this week's podcast has been getting me a slew of emails of people saying, when are you going to teach composition online? When are you going to teach it online? I think I'm going to start teaching it online soon. It will be much more activity-oriented, project-oriented, and I'll make it as cheap as I can for the people I don't give feedback to. But it'll be that each week you'll have a syllabus of stuff to do, and then coming in to discuss it and going from there. That will be announced by no later than December. Okay. See you all tomorrow. That was session 11 of 12 sessions. We're almost done. Keep in touch with what I'm doing by subscribing to my announcement list at martialart.com.